I was halfway through cutting my steak when my sister decided the table needed entertainment. That was always her talent, turning a normal family dinner into a stage where she got the spotlight and I got to be the punchline. She leaned back in her chair, tapped her new police sergeant badge like it was a Grammy, and tossed a smirk across the table at me. "So, Elise," she said, loud enough for the neighboring table to turn their heads, "did you finish pushing all your Navy paperwork today, or did they give you a day off from alphabetizing files?" My dad laughed first. He always did, not because it was funny, but because he wanted Dana to think he was still the dad who understood her world. My mom followed with a tight smile that said she hated conflict, but hated awkward silence even more. I just took another bite of steak. Steak is neutral. Steak doesn't care who you disappoint. "Well," I said, "my day wasn't really about paperwork." Dana grinned, like she'd just caught me lying on a job application. "Right. Of course not. You probably had an intense meeting about stapler inventory." The table cracked up again. If sarcasm burned calories, my family would all be athletes. I didn't bother correcting her. I wasn't allowed to. When your real job involves analyzing intel sensitive enough to disappear half your career, if you sneeze in the wrong direction, "I can't talk about it," becomes your entire personality. To my family, that made me mysterious in a boring way, like someone who hides a diary, but the diary is just grocery lists. Dana raised her glass. "To real work," she announced, "and real public service." Everyone toasted. My dad even clinked his fork against his water glass like she'd just saved a bus of orphans. I didn't say a word. Instead, I focused on how calmly I could chew. My jaw had years of practice. Growing up with Dana was like growing up next to a megaphone. She was loud, bold, certain. She was the main character of every room she entered. And our parents? They loved it. She was their golden child sport trophies. Clean police academy graduation photos, a career they could brag about to strangers in grocery lines. Me? I was the daughter who did paperwork for the military. That's what they told people when asked. Not the daughter who made it through Navy intelligence vetting. Not the daughter who passed more background checks than a cabinet nominee. Just paperwork. I tried once years ago to explain what I actually did. The responsibility it carried, the hours, the pressure, the stakes. My mom just patted my hand and said, "That's nice, dear, but it's too complicated to talk about at dinner." When something is too complicated for your family to respect, they replace it with a story they like better. Tonight, that story was in full swing. Dana kept going. "You know, Elise, you'd be great at my job. Except for the part that requires actual field work." My dad chuckled again. "She's better off with her safe desk job, less dangerous." Then he pointed his fork at me, as if he'd discovered something profound. "Right, honey?" "Sure," I said. "Something like that." It's not as having Axlow. What I actually wanted to say was, "Today, Dad, I flagged a pattern in a data stream that might prevent a federal-level threat." I watched DHS analysts get quiet because they knew what it meant. I watched my commanding officer nod and tell me, "Good catch." And no one at that table will ever know. But instead, I cut another piece of steak. Steak doesn't start arguments. Dana, sensing I wasn't flinching enough for her liking, leaned in. "Come on, Elise, admit it. The Navy stuck you in admin because you're too soft for the real stuff." I put down my fork, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and looked at her. Not like a sister. More like someone debating whether a fire alarm was worth pulling. "Dana," I said, calm as a locked vault, "my job is classified. That's all." She blinked, then burst into laughter like I'd just told the world's least funny joke. "Classified? Seriously? Elise, the only thing classified about your job is whatever seasoning they use in the cafeteria." Another round of polite family giggles. I could practically hear the credits rolling on their version of my life. I didn't laugh. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I studied her face, smug, certain, absolutely thrilled with her performance. She was so invested in belittling me, she never stopped to think why someone's military job might actually be classified. That's the funny thing about people who assume you're powerless. They never prepare for the moment you aren't. Dinner continued with her stories, traffic stops, arguments she won, small-town hero moments which my dad ate up like it was gourmet television. My mom nodded through all of it, the way she always did, the way she thought kept the peace. But peace requires respect, and I was the only one at that table who understood that. Still, I let them talk. I let Dana hold court. I let the assumptions fill the room like cheap air freshener. Because somewhere between my sister's bragging and my dad's praise, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, something colder, cleaner, a decision forming with the kind of clarity you only get when someone pushes you 1 inch too far. I didn't show it. I didn't need to. The night wasn't over yet. My sister was still talking, and she always pushed for the last word, which meant she was about to get it. And after that came the moment she never saw coming. If you've ever had someone underestimate your work or mock your service, drop a comment. I want to hear your story. And if you want more military family stories like this one, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Walking out of that dinner, the cool air hit my face harder than I expected. It wasn't the weather, it was the quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in your chest when you realize you finally hit the point where pretending stops being worth the effort. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and let the silence sit with me. It felt steadier than anything I'd heard at that table. By the time I reached base the next morning, that quiet had already shifted back into the rhythm I knew well. Security checks, badge scans, double doors sealing behind me. The moment I stepped into the skiff, the world of small-town jokes and family assumptions evaporated. In here, everything mattered. Every word, every chart, every timestamp on a data feed. I logged into my terminal, and the overhead lights hummed a familiar, steady noise. My team was already gathered around the central table, sifting through overnight reports. Lieutenant Harris slid a file toward me without looking up. Container stream from berth 14 tripped a pattern flag. That woke me right up. Berth 14 was one of the docks tied to Operation HarborNet, the multi-agency task force running on more caffeine and classified directives than anyone cared to admit. I pulled up the flagged feed, watching the numbers shift across the screen. There it was. A signal anomaly, small enough that an inexperienced analyst might dismiss it. But anomalies don't hide from someone who lives in two worlds, they just pretend to. I zoomed in. The movements were irregular. Something had been offloaded faster than usual, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Harris leaned over my shoulder. That the same pattern from last week? Close, I said, adjusting the thermal overlay. But this one's tighter. Someone learned from the last run. He nodded and walked off to notify DHS. I kept my eyes on the screen, narrowing down the window. Buried in the data was a 30-second gap. It didn't look like much. Gaps rarely do. But every meaningful threat I'd ever tracked lived in the cracks most people ignored. Our director stepped in a moment later, coffee in hand, expression already serious. "Warren, brief me." I laid it out clean and simple, no fluff, no hesitation. Berth 14 shows a controlled offload outside standard procedure. The timing matches the group HarborNet identified last quarter. If they're shifting routes, we need eyes on it now. He nodded once. Run a cross-check with Coast Guard intel. If it matches, you lead the preliminary assessment. That was it. No jokes about paperwork, no smirks, no questions about whether I was capable. Just trust. While the room moved into motion, I monitored the downstream feeds. The more I dug, the more the picture sharpened into something dangerous. A pattern this specific meant coordination, and coordination meant someone on the ground might be seeing things they didn't understand. That thought hit harder when I saw the timestamp of a patrol car passing near the flagged container yard the night before. The incident report ID wasn't familiar until it was. My stomach tightened. My sister's precinct. Dana had been there. Right in the area of an active federal operation. And she probably thought it was just another traffic stop or suspicious van to flex her authority over. I exhaled through my nose and pushed the thought aside before it could turn into anything sentimental. In this room, even the hint of personal connection could compromise a case. That's the difference between family logic and military logic. In one world, everything's personal. In the other, nothing is. Harris called from across the room. Coast Guard confirmed the vessel's signature. You were right. It's the same group. The director turned to me. Get your report ready. Joint briefing in 20. I gathered my notes, slid them into a folder, and headed for the conference room. Through the glass wall, the rest of the task force filtered in DHS agents in their business casual seriousness, CBP analysts armed with more spreadsheets than weapons, Coast Guard reps who always looked like they'd rather be out on the water. As the briefing began, I laid out the sequence of events. Clear, direct, and grounded in evidence. The older DHS agent across the table gave me a look of recognition, the good kind. The kind that says, "You're sharp, and we trust you." That moment was a quiet contrast to the night before, where my competence was the punchline to a family joke. Here, the room adjusted to what I said, not the other way around. When the meeting wrapped, I returned to my desk to run the deeper analysis. My terminal pinged with a new alert from HarborNet. Another anomaly. This one bigger. I pulled it up and waited for the map to render. The dots lined up in a way that pushed everything else out of my head. They were preparing a coordinated offload. Not small, not careless, intentional. Someone was getting ready for a move. I leaned back in my chair, a dry laugh slipping out before I could stop it. At dinner, Dana had been busy mocking me for pushing papers. Meanwhile, those same papers, the data sets she thought were meaningless, were the reason I knew something serious was unfolding at a place tied directly to her beat. If she had any idea what the work really was, she might have held off on the jokes. My screen blinked again. Another alert. This one required immediate attention. I clicked it open without looking away. There was no space in this room for family comments or small-town pride. All that mattered was the next decision, and the chain of consequences that followed. And the pattern in front of me was warning that the next one wouldn't wait. The alert on my screen kept pulsing, and I opened the attached incident log. The moment the report loaded, my shoulders tightened. A routine traffic stop had been logged near the container yard, same time as the flagged anomaly. The patrol car ID matched the precinct I knew too well. I scrolled down, and the name hit me before I was ready for it. Sergeant Dana Warren. For a second, the room felt smaller. Not because of fear, but because the overlap between our worlds had finally stopped being theoretical. She had been right there, feet away from an active federal pattern, completely unaware of the kind of operation she had stepped into. Harris walked by, saw the tension in my jaw, and raised an eyebrow. "Something off?" I asked. "Just a messy report timestamp," I said, clicking to the next tab. He nodded and kept moving. He didn't need to know. No one here did. I dug deeper into the feed, tracking the pattern backward. The flagged container had shifted off the grid for a stretch of time that lined up a little too neatly with Dana's stop. She must have pulled over a driver who was stalling, buying time, or redirecting attention. Not her fault she didn't know the broader picture, but ignorance doesn't make a federal disruption any less real. While I mapped the sequence onto the port layout, the director approached. "Warren, any movement on the offload pattern?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "There's a chance the last diversion was caused by a local patrol. Unintentional, but it threw off the trail for several hours." He frowned. "Which agency?" "Municipal," I said. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. He exhaled through his nose. "Another reason we need more controlled coordination. Add that note to your assessment. Keep it professional. No blame." I nodded. He walked off, and I stared at the screen again. Keeping it professional was easy. Keeping it separate was the hard part. My phone buzzed. A group text from my parents about a barbecue next weekend, asking if I could bring those cookies from the Navy commissary. I turned the phone face down. That tiny message carried the same problem as the anomaly on my screen. People acting without awareness of the larger picture they were involved in. I finished the mapping overlay, marking where the container disappeared and reappeared. Whoever was moving these shipments had adapted, fast. Faster than last quarter, which meant someone on their side had gotten smarter, or someone on our side had gotten careless. As I ran the last comparative analysis, Harris reappeared with a cup of burnt coffee. "Director wants your preliminary assessment in 30. Coast Guard's asking whether our data suggests a shift west." "It might," I said, "but I want the thermal comparison clean before we send anything." "Copy," he said. "Also, DHS is looping in 2 more analysts. Looks like they're gearing for a bigger sweep." I nodded. watching him leave. The escalation made sense. The pattern was widening. And if that was happening, someone on the ground would notice unusual activity, whether they recognized it or not. My thoughts snapped back to Dana again. I pulled up her precinct's logs. Another call from the same zone 2 nights before. She'd responded to that one, too. I leaned back and rubbed my hands together. Great. 2 overlapping interactions, with an active operation, and neither of us could acknowledge it. And if Dana ever knew how close she'd been to disrupting a federal chain twice, she'd either brag about it or claim she helped. Neither option was comforting. The director stepped out of his office. Briefing room in 5. I gathered the files, slid them into a folder, and followed him in. The Coast Guard reps had already logged into the monitor. DHS analysts joined via secure line, faces half-lit by their office screens. The room smelled faintly like cold coffee, and long hours exactly the environment where real decisions got made. The director opened. "Warren, walk us through the anomaly." I stood at the head of the table and laid out the sequence. No stutter, no hesitation. The map unfolded cleanly. We're looking at tightening intervals, coordinated shifts. Whoever's running these containers isn't guessing. They know the port's vulnerabilities. One of the DHS analysts leaned toward her mic. "Do we have reason to believe they've shifted personnel?" "Possibly," I said. The last diversion bought them a significant window, enough to hide one offload entirely. "And the cause of that diversion?" the agent asked. "A local patrol car," I replied simply. Unintentional, but the timing lined up. They nodded. No one asked for names. It didn't matter who had done it. In this room, only patterns and consequences mattered. When the briefing ended, the director gave me a tight nod. Respect. Actual respect. The kind I never had to earn with jokes or performance. It was just there because I did my job well. Back at my desk, I typed up the next portion of the assessment. The thermal overlay finished rendering, confirming my earlier suspicion. The offload route was shifting faster than projected. It wasn't random. It was methodical. And it meant the task force was about to get a lot busier. I double-checked the readings, added the confirmation to the report, and sent it to the director's secure inbox. The computer chimed once. The room settled back into the low hum of everyone working in the same direction. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and let the screen blur for a second. Somewhere across town, Dana was probably writing up a patrol log or bragging to her coworkers about how she handled some suspicious driver. She had no idea that simple stop had thrown our analysis into chaos. And she never would. Not officially. But I knew this much. Whenever our worlds collided, one of them came with rules, precision, and consequences. The other came with loud opinions and very little context. And as long as those 2 worlds kept brushing against each other, I'd be the one holding the line where they met. Sitting in the skiff, after the briefing, I felt that familiar pressure building behind my ribs, the kind that didn't come from classified intel or tight deadlines. It came from the leftover noise of the night before Dana's voice in my ear, while the task force trusted me to interpret data that actually mattered. 2 worlds that couldn't be more different, yet somehow kept intersecting at the worst possible angles. When my shift ended, I shut down my terminal, cleared my workspace, and checked out through the layers of security. The walk to my car was quiet, but not the steady kind I liked. This one had an edge, like my own patience had a timer on it. By the time I got home, my phone had already buzzed 3 times with messages from my parents. 2 were photos of Dana in her uniform. Apparently, she'd been featured in some local precinct newsletter again. The third was my dad saying, "You should be more like your sister. She makes us proud." I tossed the phone onto the couch and stood there for a moment, letting that sink in. It was always the same script, delivered with the same unshakable confidence. They never once paused to consider that my job might demand more of me than a photo op. Later that week, my mom insisted we all meet for dinner again to stay connected. Translation: another chance for Dana to perform, and for me to smile quietly in the background. I showed up anyway, not because I expected anything, but because some part of me still believed consistency counted for something. We met at a small family restaurant. Dana strutted in like she owned the place, badge gleaming, hair perfectly styled in that, I didn't try but I did, way. My parents lit up immediately, the way some people do when their favorite celebrity walks in. My mom hugged her like she'd just returned from war. My dad clapped her on the shoulder and asked if she'd caught any bad guys this week. When they turned to me, the energy dropped 3 notches. "Elise," my dad said, nodding. "Work good?" I wasn't expecting a ticker tape parade, but the whiplash was still impressive. We sat down, menus open. Dana jumped straight into a story about a guy she pulled over who looked suspicious, which was her code for, "This story makes me look powerful." My parents leaned in, eating it up. Then my mom shifted the conversation. "Elise, sweetie, we got your birthday card with the Navy emblem on it. Very cute." "Cute." A card representing federal service was cute. "Glad you liked it," I said. "You should send us pictures of your office," she continued. "Your sister posts hers all the time. It looks so exciting." Dana smirked. "You probably can't, Mom. Her office is top secret." She used air quotes like she was mocking a child pretending to be a superhero. I met her eyes. "Actually, it is." The table fell silent for half a beat. Then Dana burst out laughing. "Oh, come on. Top secret? Elise, please. You work at a desk. You probably know more about copier jams than classified anything." My dad chuckled. "Now, Dana, don't tease your sister. She's sensitive about her job." That hit harder than anything else said that night. Sensitive. As if I couldn't handle the reality of my own career. As if my silence was weakness instead of protocol. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. "I'm not sensitive," I said. "I just can't talk about what I do." Dana raised an eyebrow. Convenient. My teeth pressed together. Years of biting my tongue had given me Olympic-level self-control, but even that had a limit, and I could feel that limit clawing its way up my throat. I took a sip of water, set the glass down, and looked at Dana fully. "Why do you care what I do, honestly?" She blinked, thrown off for a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "you bring up my job more than I do." My mom immediately reached for her napkin like she was preparing for a spill. "Girls, let's not start," Dana scoffed. "I don't bring it up to fight. I'm just saying you could do more. You're smart. You could be out there, making a difference." I stared at her, trying not to show how surreal the moment felt. She had no idea, none, and she said it with absolute certainty built on assumption, not truth. My dad chimed in. "Dana risks her life out there. That's what real service looks like." There it was. The line they'd drawn without thinking. The kind they never realized cut clean through 2 daughters sitting at the same table. I felt something shift inside my chest, not anger, not sadness, just clarity. A razor-thin line between what they thought they knew and what they'd never bothered to ask. I set my fork down. "You have no idea what my job is." The table went still. My parents waited for Dana to jump in, and she did. "Oh, please," she said. "If your job were actually important, someone would know about it." I let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. More like disbelief finally taking shape. "You know," I said, "there's a difference between not knowing something and assuming it isn't real." Dana leaned back, crossing her arms. "Okay, philosopher, enlighten us." I shook my head once. "Can't." "Oh, right," she mocked. "It's classified." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't the usual awkward tension. It was something sharper, like the air shifting just before a door opens. And even though no one at that table understood why the moment felt different, I did. The silence between us barely had time to settle before Dana signaled the waiter, like she owned the entire restaurant. She ordered another drink, sat back in her chair, and looked at me with the kind of grin people usually reserve for card tricks they think they've figured out. My parents tried to restart small talk, but it kept collapsing under its own weight. Even they could feel something simmering. When the menus were cleared and dinner plates arrived, Dana leaned forward, elbows on the table, ready to perform again. "So, Elise," she said, drawing out my name, "do you ever actually leave your desk? Or is that top secret too?" My mom tensed. My dad sighed like he was tired of defending me for something he didn't understand. I cut my food with deliberate calm, trying to decide if responding was even worth it, but Dana didn't wait. "You know," she continued, "people in my precinct keep asking what you actually do. I tell them you're an admin at the Navy. Which isn't bad, someone has to file the forms. I set my fork down. I'm not an admin. She smirked. Right. Of course. You're in that mysterious classified world, where no one knows anything, including you. I expects to the date. If she'd stopped there, maybe the night would have ended like every other. Mild humiliation, internal eye-rolling, and me going home to decompress. But Dana didn't stop. Dana never stopped when she sensed she had an audience, even if that audience was just herself. She glanced at my belt, where my badge was clipped under my jacket. Hey, what's that? Your little Navy ID? She said it loud enough that 2 nearby tables turned. I didn't move. You don't need to touch it. That warning tone should have been enough. Anyone with situational awareness would have backed off. But Dana wasn't trained to read silence, she was trained to read control, and she thought she had it. She stood up abruptly, reaching toward my jacket like she had the right. Let me see that thing. I want to know what a classified desk job looks like. My dad hissed, Dana, sit down, but she grabbed the badge before I could stop her. The room felt smaller for half a second. She held it up like she'd caught a fish. What is this supposed to be? Elise, where'd you buy this? Online? A Halloween store? My mom covered her mouth in a mix of panic and embarrassment. I stayed still, letting her dig her own hole. What is this eagle? What do these colors mean? Dana mocked. This doesn't look real. It doesn't even look like the IDs we confiscate from wannabe federal agents. Desert it was brack too. You don't know what you're holding, I said. Oh, please, she shot back. It's fake. I deal with fake badges all the time. You think I don't know what real federal credentials look like? She turned to the restaurant crowd like she expected applause. Then she announced it. I'm detaining you for impersonating Navy intel. The dining room went quiet. Chairs stopped moving. Conversations froze. Even the waiter halted mid-step. That's enough, I said quietly. No, she snapped. You've been lying for years. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending this whole classified thing isn't ridiculous. She pointed at the badge like she'd just cracked open a conspiracy. My captain is going to love this. She pulled out her phone and dialed him right there, pacing between tables like she was conducting an operation. Captain Alvarez? Yes, sir. I have a situation. I need you at Shoreline Grill. I've detained someone claiming to be Navy intelligence. My parents stared at her in horror, but not because they understood the scale of what she'd just done. They were just scared of public embarrassment. They had no idea she'd crossed a legal and professional line that could shake her entire career. Dana hung up and marched back to the table with full theatrical flair. He's on his way, she said triumphantly. You're done, Elise. It's playstage. I stayed seated, hands resting lightly on the table. The calm that washed over me didn't feel like fear or anger. It felt like decision, the kind of decision that settles into your bones and tells you nothing needs to be forced anymore. Some things reveal themselves exactly when they're meant to. Dana planted her hands on her hips. Go on, say something. I unclipped the badge she'd dropped on the table and placed it in front of me. No. What do you mean no? You want a scene, I said. I'm not giving you one. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, come on, you can't even defend your fake badge? My mom whispered. Elise, please. Just apologize, she's upset. Don't forget it by. That almost made me laugh. Apologize for what? Following federal protocol? Passing decades of clearance checks? Doing a job they never cared to ask about? The restaurant doors opened. Captain Alvarez stepped inside, scanning the room with the weary look of a man summoned for nonsense. Dana waved him over like she was flagging a taxi. Captain, over here! He approached with the resigned body language of someone expecting exaggerated drama. But then his eyes dropped to the badge in front of me. He froze. His posture straightened almost instantly. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, feet together, a muscle in his jaw twitched with recognition. I watched the exact moment he realized who I was, not Elise the paper pusher, not the sister Dana teased, but someone whose clearance outranked every person in that room. Lieutenant Commander Warren, he said, voice crisp and formal. Ma'am. Dana's mouth fell open. My dad blinked like he'd misheard. My mom covered her chest as if bracing for impact, and the only sound I heard was the steady calm inside my own head as the truth settled into every corner of the room. Captain Alvarez's ma'am was still hanging in the air when I rose from my seat. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. The restaurant had gone so quiet you could hear the clink of a fork 3 tables away. Dana stepped back automatically, like her body understood what her brain hadn't caught up to yet. Alvarez cleared his throat and addressed her without breaking posture. "Sergeant Warren, would you like to explain why you called me here?" Dana blinked hard, words scrambled. "Sir, I detained her for impersonating intelligence personnel." She pointed at me like she was presenting evidence in a talent show. She had a fake badge. Alvarez's eyes flicked to the table. "That badge is not fake." Dana stared at him. "But sir, I've never seen anything like it." "That's because you are not cleared too," he replied. The force of that sentence landed before he even finished speaking. My dad's shoulders slumped. My mom's hand flew to her mouth again. Dana's face lost every ounce of confidence she walked in with. Alvarez turned to me. "Lieutenant Commander, did Sergeant Warren interfere with official credentials?" "I didn't give her permission to take the badge," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But I'm not filing anything." A murmur spread across the nearby tables. Someone whispered, "Lieutenant Commander?" Another said, "Intel?" People were rearranging their entire perception of the situation in real time, like the room was mentally rewinding every second that came before. Alvarez nodded respectfully. "Understood, ma'am." Then he faced Dana again. "Sergeant," a word outside. Dana followed him out on instinct, stiff-legged and pale. My parents didn't breathe until the door shut behind them. My dad finally whispered, "Elise, what exactly do you do?" I pulled my chair in and sat down, hands folded neatly. "My job," my mom blinked. "Lieutenant Commander? That's my rank," I said simply. Her breathing hitched. "All this time, all these years, you never told us, you never asked." The silence wasn't hostile, it was hollow, like the air had been knocked out of a family dynamic that had survived on assumptions for too long. My dad stared down at his plate as if trying to understand how the world rearranged itself without his permission. My mom looked at me like she was seeing an adult for the first time. Through the restaurant's front windows, I could see Dana and Alvarez on the sidewalk. He wasn't yelling, he didn't need to. The rigid way Dana kept nodding told me everything. She wasn't being scolded, she was being reality checked. When they came back inside, her shoulders weren't squared anymore. She approached the table slowly, almost cautiously, like she was entering an exam she hadn't studied for. "Sit," Alvarez instructed gently. She obeyed. He addressed my parents with professional courtesy. "Your daughter is an asset to naval intelligence. She holds a level of clearance higher than most personnel in state or local law enforcement. Mishandling her credentials constitutes a serious breach." My mom looked like she'd been physically struck by the word breach. My dad swallowed hard. "Captain, we didn't know." "That's exactly the point," he said. "People who work in her field cannot discuss their roles. They aren't allowed to talk about their day. They don't get to brag, and they certainly do not get credit for what they do." He gave a small nod toward me, almost an apology for having to spell it out. Then he turned to Dana. "Sergeant Warren, you will reflect on the significance of rank, chain of command, and respect for federal credentials. Your behavior tonight was inappropriate and dangerous." Dangerous. A word that hit Dana harder than the rest. She stared at the table. "Yes, sir." Alvarez straightened. "Lieutenant Commander Warren, is there anything else you need from me?" "No, Captain. Thank you for coming." He dipped his head. "Any time, ma'am." And then he left, doors closing behind him with a soft thud that marked the end of a version of reality my family had clung to for years. Dana lifted her eyes slowly. The arrogance was gone. So was the smirk. What replaced them wasn't fear, it was recognition. The kind people feel when they finally understand they've been speaking loudly in a room they never realized was full of microphones. "Elise," she whispered. I didn't answer. She didn't really have anything to say yet. My mom finally broke the quiet. "Honey, why didn't you tell us you were—" "I did tell you," I said gently. "Not the details, but I told you enough." My dad rubbed his forehead. "We just thought you had an office job." "You decided that," I said. "I never said it." They both sank deeper into their chairs. Dana cleared her throat softly. You're, really? Navy intel? Yes. And you're a lieutenant commander? Yes. And Captain Alvarez saluted you. It's not live. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just answered honestly. Yes. My sister's jaw tightened not in anger, but in the painful shift of someone realizing she had spent years building a personality around being the impressive one, only to learn the foundation wasn't what she thought. I messed up, she said quietly. There it was. Not an apology. Not yet, but the faint outline of accountability, something that had never existed between us before. I finished the water in front of me, set the glass down, and looked straight at her. The restaurant had settled into a slow murmur again, everyone pretending not to eavesdrop. Dana, I said softly, you have no idea how much you could have jeopardized. She nodded, shame rising up in her cheeks. I know, but the truth was, she didn't, not fully. Not yet. And, as she sat across from me, shoulders drawn inward, eyes finally quiet, I realized this was the first time my sister had ever looked at me without underestimating me. It was a start, a small one, but a start nonetheless. I pushed my chair back just enough to breathe, and Dana watched me like every movement was evidence in a case she'd already lost. The room returned to its soft restaurant hum, but our table stayed locked inside its own vacuum. My mom kept wringing her napkin, tearing small wrinkles into it. My dad looked like he was still waiting for someone to jump out and yell, "Prank." Dana finally spoke again, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Elise? I didn't mean for it to go like that. I kept my hands on the edge of the table, steady and relaxed. You didn't think it could go any other way. She flinched, not because I said it sharply, but because I said it plainly. Dana had built her entire sense of competence around the idea that she was always the most prepared person in the room. Tonight had taken that belief, snapped it clean in half, and handed the pieces back to her. My dad leaned forward. Honey, why didn't you tell us your rank, or your work, or anything? Tense Cromit. I looked at him directly. Dad, when have you ever listened long enough for it to matter? He opened his mouth, then closed it, and that silence said more than any apology he could have mustered. My mom put her hand on my arm. Sweetie, we didn't know. We truly didn't. You didn't ask, I said, not accusing, just factual. And any time I tried to explain even the smallest thing, you waved it off, said it sounded technical or not as exciting as Dana's stuff. You made it clear the version of me you liked best was the one that didn't ask for space at the table. Dana swallowed hard. Elise, I was proud of my job. I thought that you were the only one doing something that mattered? I asked, not harsh but honest. Yeah, I noticed. Her shoulders dropped. Years of rivalry, years of eye rolls, years of her loudness overshadowing everything I did, they all lived right there in the slump of her posture. A server came by to refill water, and all four of us went quiet until he moved on. When he left, Dana clasped her hands together like she was bracing for turbulence. What Captain Alvarez said, she whispered. Is it really that serious, what I did? Yes, I said. Detaining someone you think is impersonating federal authority isn't the problem. Detaining someone who actually has that authority? That's a different animal. End quote. She nodded, absorbing it slowly, like her brain had to file every word into a folder that hadn't existed before tonight. My dad exhaled. Are they going to? He motioned vaguely toward the restaurant door. Do anything to her? No, I said. She's not getting fired. She'll get remedial training, maybe a note in her file. But she'll keep her job. Mom seemed relieved, but Dana didn't. The look on her face wasn't fear, it was humiliation blooming into uncomfortable understanding. I never wanted to hurt you, she said quietly. I shrugged. Intent isn't the issue, impact is. Her eyes lifted. I didn't know you had that kind of authority. That's the point, I said. You didn't know. Because you didn't care enough to find out. My dad looked like he wanted to defend her habit more than choice, but even he realized this wasn't the moment to pick a favorite. I pushed my glass aside. Look, Dana, I'm not angry, not anymore, but I'm also not going to pretend this is a small thing. You tried to arrest me in the middle of a restaurant. She shut her eyes in embarrassment. You mocked my job, I continued. You mocked my badge. You mocked the Navy. You mocked everything I've spent my life working toward. And you did it with the confidence of someone who thought she understood my world better than I did. She opened her eyes, raw and honest for once. I was an ass. Yes, I said, but you can stop being one. Something cracked in her expression, a defensive shell she'd carried since high school. She looked younger suddenly, like the Dana from years ago before every conversation became a competition. My mom dabbed the corner of her eye. Girls, we raised you both to. I stopped her with a look. Mom, you raised us to avoid conflict at any cost. Except the cost was usually me. She didn't argue. She couldn't. My dad straightened his silverware like it was a coping mechanism. Elise, do you like your job? I'm good at my job, I said. And that's enough. Anyway, he nodded but still looked unsettled, like the world had rotated 5 degrees without warning, and he was trying to regain balance. Dana stared at me for a long moment, then reached for her water, but missed the glass slightly. That shaky, off-center motion told me more than any speech could. She finally whispered, Elise, I don't know how to fix what happened tonight. You start, I said gently, by respecting what you don't understand. Dana absorbed that, chewing on it, letting it settle into her bones. Okay, she said quietly, I can do that. The simplicity of her answer surprised me more than anything else tonight. No excuses, no deflection, just acceptance. I didn't smile, but I also didn't pull away from her the way I usually did. The table felt different, not healed, not repaired, but shifted into a new configuration, one where everyone finally acknowledged we weren't standing on the same level ground. The server dropped off the check, and Dad reached for it automatically, a reflex older than our dysfunction. But he stopped halfway and looked at me again, really looked like he was trying to reconcile the daughter he'd known with the officer he'd just met. Elise, he said softly, I'm proud of you. He meant it, and for the first time in years, I believed him. I let a slow breath roll through me, the tension in my shoulders easing just a little as the reality of the night settled into something quieter, something steadier, something that felt like the ground shifting into place rather than collapsing. And for the first time since we sat down at that table, the weight didn't just sit on me, it settled across all of us. The next morning, the familiar weight of my CAC card against my palm grounded me in a way no family dinner ever could. Walking through the Pentagon's secured halls was like letting my lungs work again. Badge scan, green light, the low metal click of the door unlocking my world, recognizing me with precision my family never had. Inside the skiff, the air sat at its usual cold, dry temperature. Rows of monitors glowed with encrypted feeds and satellite telemetry. This room didn't care about family politics or who said what over dinner. It cared about data, timing, consequences, and decisions made without ego. Exactly the environment where I functioned best. Morning, Commander, Major Harris said, as I stepped inside. Efficient, steady, already reviewing a live feed from a drone sweep over the eastern corridor. Status? I asked, sliding into my seat. Night cycle was quiet, he said. But we need your review on the infiltration pattern. Something's shifting. I nodded, pulling up the data stream. The screen filled with heat signatures, coded messages, and movement graphs. My mind locked into the tempo immediately, each new line of intel folding into the mental framework that had shaped me far more than my upbringing ever did. Lieutenant Knox stepped in with 2 mugs. Coffee, he said, before you deep dive into the matrix again. I appreciate it, I said, taking the mug, but I'm not the one who spent all night arguing with a malfunctioning data node. Knox grinned. It wasn't malfunctioning, it was ignoring me. That's not how machines work, Harris called out without looking up. That's exactly what a machine loyalist would say, Knox shot back. The light banter settled into the room like a familiar rhythm, one built from trust, earned through competence, not inherited through family roles. These people didn't treat me as the quieter daughter or the less exciting sister. They treated me as the ranking officer who had a job to do. As I scanned the incoming intel, a small red icon blinked on my screen, an update request from the Naval Intelligence Director's office. Commander Warren, the automated voice said through the earpiece, you are requested in briefing room 3B at 0900 for a priority review. Copy, I said. Harris raised an eyebrow. That from upstairs? Looks like it. Knox exhaled dramatically. Ah, yes. Our fearless commander, being summoned by the Olympus crowd. Try not to come back with thunderbolts. I stood, grabbing the necessary files. If lightning hits this room, it's looking for you first. Their laughter followed me out into the hallway. The briefing room was smaller than most people imagined. No giant screens, no dramatic war table, just a clean, rectangular space where the stakes lived in the silence. Deputy Director Leland stood at the far end, arms crossed, gray hair cut in the exact style of a man who never had 5 extra minutes in the morning. Commander Warren, he said, have a seat. I slid into the chair, posture straight but not rigid. He tapped his tablet, pulling up satellite images on the monitor behind him. We need your assessment, he said. Your last report predicted 2 possible breach routes. We're seeing movement consistent with your secondary forecast. Secondary forecast. The one everyone but Leland had quietly dismissed 3 weeks earlier. I took a closer look. You're right. The shift is deliberate. They're testing perimeter timing. This isn't random probing. Leland nodded. That's my read. What's your counter? We widen the window on the southwest return vector, I said. They think we didn't notice the staggered pattern last week. We respond as if we still haven't. They get confident. And then we close the door, hard. Leland gave the smallest approving nod, the kind that meant more than applause ever could. Good, execute it. He tapped his tablet again, then looked at me directly. I read the commendation from Secretary Hale regarding Operation Corsair, he said. Impressive work. Thank you, sir. And the Chimera recovery, your judgment under pressure, was noted by multiple commands. I held his gaze. It was a team effort. A faint smirk crossed his face. Spoken like a true officer. For a moment, the room felt suspended in a calm clarity that only came from being exactly where you were meant to be. Not proving anything. Not defending anything. Simply being in alignment with the life you'd built. As the meeting wrapped, Leland closed his folder. One more thing. I heard about the situation last night. I blinked. Slow. Of course he knew. News traveled differently in my world. He didn't pry. He didn't ask for details. He simply said, family doesn't always know how to value what they don't understand. But the work you do is understood here. There were no flowery words, no comforting clichés, just a simple truth delivered without ornament. Yes, sir, I said. Walking back through the hallway, my mind drifted not to the embarrassment on Dana's face, or my parents' stunned silence, but to the difference between these 2 worlds. Here, no one underestimated me. No one assumed anything. Respect wasn't negotiable, because it wasn't personal. It was earned. When I stepped back into the skiff, Harris looked up. Everything good? Better than good, I said, sliding into my chair. Knox spun around in his seat. Did they promote you to Empress of all Intel? Not today. He snapped his fingers. Tragic. Their humor eased into the room again, syncopated with the quiet hum of servers and the steady blinking of encrypted feeds. My real life. My real family. In many ways. I reviewed the new Intel package, adjusting parameters and pushing updates through the secure channel. As the analytical patterns aligned and the operation shifted into a safer trajectory, something settled in me, something clean, something steady. Not triumph, not vindication, just certainty. The kind you feel when the noise of other people's opinions finally fades enough for you to hear your own footing. Outside the skiff, the day pressed on toward its next crisis, its next decision, its next necessity. Inside, the steady flow of intel demanded attention, judgment, and discipline, things I carried without needing applause or validation. And with each passing minute, the contrast between last night's chaos and this morning's clarity sharpened into something unmistakable, something I had stopped yearning for long ago but recognized immediately once it arrived, a life that made sense. The late afternoon sun hit the Pentagon courtyard in long, sharp lines as I stepped outside for a few minutes of air. My phone buzzed a single message from Dana. Can we talk? In person? Your place? Tonight? Short, uncharacteristically careful, no excuses attached. I typed back, 7, Don't be late. Not cold. Not warm. Just clear. By the time she arrived, I had already changed into a simple sweatshirt and pulled my hair back. Off duty, but still in the posture of someone who had spent the day thinking 5 moves ahead, Dana stood at my door, with her hands shoved awkwardly into her jacket pockets, like she wasn't sure what to do with them. She stepped inside slowly, looking around my apartment, the clean lines, the organized desk, the carefully locked cabinet holding classified documents no visitor would ever see. "You live really neatly," she said, which for her was practically a dissertation. I motioned for her to sit. She picked the armchair instead of the couch, a small sign she wasn't trying to invade my space. Progress. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of my air purifier. Then she inhaled sharply and said, "I messed up." Her voice cracked just enough to prove it wasn't a performance. "You did," I said. "But you're not the first person to underestimate me. You're just the one who yelled it across a crowded restaurant." She shut her eyes. "I'm so embarrassed I can't sleep." Embarrassment isn't the same as understanding. Her eyes opened again, tired, but clearer. "I know. That's why I'm here." I leaned back, arms crossed. "Then start where it actually matters." She gripped the sides of the chair. "I thought you didn't take your job seriously. I thought you were just in some office doing paperwork. And I thought my job was more important," I finished. She nodded, shame pooling in her posture. I studied her for a moment, not the uniformed sergeant, not the loud sister, but the woman who had always pushed hard because she thought that was the only way to be seen. "You know what bothered me most?" I asked. "That you treated me like a threat?" she asked. "No," I said. "That you treated me like a joke." She winced. I deserved that. The room settled into a heavy but honest quiet. This wasn't the first conversation we'd needed to have, but it was the first time she'd ever actually been present enough to have it. Dana exhaled slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Safely? If it's not classified," I said. She rubbed her forehead. "Do you ever get scared, doing what you do?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Every competent person in my field feels fear. Fear means you understand the stakes. Fear means you'll be careful." She absorbed that like she was hearing the definition of something she'd misunderstood her whole life. "I always thought bravery meant you act like nothing scares you," she said quietly. "That's not bravery," I replied. "That's denial." Dana let that sink in, her thumb tracing the seam of the chair like she needed something grounding. "Last night, when Captain Alvarez saluted you, I felt like the floor dropped out from under me." "It did," I said plainly. "Your version of me doesn't exist in the real world." My words weren't cruel, just accurate. "And the worst part?" she whispered. "I liked that version better because it made me feel bigger." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. That confession was the pivot. Dana swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Elise. Not the fake kind of sorry that's just cleanup. I'm sorry for being competitive with you when there wasn't even a competition. I'm sorry for mocking something I didn't understand. And I'm sorry for not seeing you, until a man outranking me, stood at attention in front of you." Honesty. Finally. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you." "Tu mind de Zoes." Her shoulders loosened, relief flickering through her expression. "Can I fix this? Not the badge thing, the sister thing." "You can try," I said. "But it's not a sprint." "I know." A long pause passed between us, one that didn't feel hostile for the first time in years. She looked around again, taking in the quiet of my apartment. "It's strange," she murmured. "I always thought you were the one living a smaller life." "And now?" I asked. She laughed under her breath, a tired, honest sound. "Now I think my whole world might have been the small one." I didn't smile, but something in me unclenched. This wasn't redemption, this wasn't a perfect fix. But this was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement was the currency she had always held back. "You know," she said, shifting in her seat. "I looked up your rank last night, and?" Her face went red. "Lieutenant Commander outranks every single supervisor I have. If you ever wanted to make fun of my job, now would be the time." "I don't need to do that," I said. "I grew out of the game you were still playing." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I finally figured that out." I watched her posture soften. Not defeated, just humbled in a way that might actually last. She stood, smoothing her jacket. I won't take more of your night. I just needed to say it to your face. You did. Take you watching. She opened the door, paused, and looked back. If you ever want me to actually listen to something about your work, whatever you're allowed to say, I'm here. I'll let you know, I said. Dana gave a small nod, not manufactured, not dramatic, and stepped out into the hallway. The door closed with a soft click. No tension, no explosion, just a quiet, steady shift. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that signals something real. The next day moved at the same tempo as always: secure doors, clipped conversations, encrypted screens. Routine in my world wasn't dull, it was grounding. And after the emotional excavation with Dana the night before, that grounding felt sharper than usual, like the edges of my life had been cleaned up. By mid-afternoon, Major Harris dropped a folder on my desk. Director Hale wants eyes on your Corsair projections before close of business. Already ahead of him, I said, sliding the document back. Revised analysis is uploaded. He smirked. You know, the rest of us like to pretend we have a chance to keep up with you. Pretend harder, I said, sipping my coffee. The casual banter, the quiet efficiency, the steady hum of purpose. This room didn't care who my sister was or what she thought she knew about me. There were no family roles here, no dismissive jokes, no invisibility, just work that mattered, and people who understood exactly what that meant. Around 1800, I finished the last audit and powered down my terminal. As I stepped into the hallway, Knox caught up with me. Heading out? He asked. Yep. He held the elevator door. Big plans tonight? Saving democracy? Breaking an enemy algorithm? Taking over the world? Laundry, I said. Terrifying. We parted ways with a laugh, and I walked out into the crisp early evening air. The sky was turning that deep navy blue that only seems to exist over D.C., the quiet pocket of the day, when the city slows down but never fully rests. When I got home, there was a small envelope slipped under my apartment door, handwritten, which already told me it wasn't military. I picked it up, turning it over once before opening it. Inside was a card, simple, no glitter, no cartoon characters, just plain white with black ink. Elise, thank you for giving me the chance to say what I needed to say last night. I know I have a lot to unlearn. I'm not asking you to pretend things didn't happen. I'm just hoping we can build something on top of the truth, instead of the assumptions I used to hide behind. Dana. No excuses, no defensiveness, just accountability. The kind that wasn't meant to impress me, just meant to be true. I set the card on my counter and let the quiet settle around me. Not triumphant, not dramatic, just real. Later in the evening, I reheated leftovers, changed into sweats, and sank onto the couch with the muted comfort of a familiar routine. My personal phone buzzed again, not Dana this time, but my dad. Proud of you, truly. I'm sorry it took me too long to see you clearly. 5 hours ago, that message would have stunned me. Now, it just felt like another puzzle piece falling into a place it probably should have been in years earlier. I didn't reply right away. Not out of resentment, just because I didn't feel rushed. For once, the weight of their expectations wasn't on me to carry or dodge. It simply wasn't there. I wrote back eventually. Thank you, I'm good, Dad, really. And I was. Later that night, I stepped out onto my balcony. The city stretched out below me, lit in a soft grid of street lamps and windows. Somewhere across town, my sister was probably replaying last night's events through a new lens, one shaped by humility instead of ego. Somewhere even farther, inside the Pentagon's walls, satellite feeds were humming, data streams rolling forward, missions shifting with each decision. My worlds were different, separate, but for the first time, neither felt like a lie. The door behind me creaked as a breeze pushed against it, and I leaned on the railing, letting the city's quiet fill the air. I thought about that night in the restaurant, the sharp silence, the way Captain Alvarez's posture had snapped to attention, the precise moment every assumption my family held about me collapsed under the weight of reality. It wasn't revenge. Not in the flashy, dramatic sense people imagine. It was truth. Plain, unvarnished truth. And sometimes, Truth is the cleanest form of justice. My phone buzzed again. A message from Harris this time. Corsair model update approved. Director Hale signed off. Good work, Commander. I smiled. A real one. The kind that came from the inside. Not from being seen, not from being validated by family, but from knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be. I typed a quick acknowledgement and locked my phone. Standing there, the cool air brushing against my jawline, I let the quiet victory settle in. Not the kind you parade around, not the kind you use to score points in old family battles, the kind you carry in your chest, steady and private. Dana had seen me for the first time. My parents had finally stopped shrinking me to fit their narrative, and I no longer felt the urge to shrink myself just to keep the peace. That wasn't a dramatic ending. That wasn't a movie moment. That was something better, closure that didn't need applause. I left the balcony door cracked open as I walked back inside, letting the nighttime air drift through the room. The world outside kept moving, traffic lights changing, people walking dogs, metro buses screeching through distant turns. Life, continuing at its own steady pace. And inside my apartment, the last traces of the old version of my life, the one built around other people's misunderstanding, finally dissolved. I didn't need anyone to validate what I'd built. I didn't need to prove my worth in a dining room full of people who only listened for the answer they expected. I knew who I was, I knew what I carried, and I knew that every ounce of authority, responsibility, and silence I held was earned, not granted. There was no explosion of triumph here, no dramatic swell of music, just the quiet kind of victory, the kind you don't need to announce for it to matter. Thank you for watching and staying with me through this entire journey. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next stories.